In honor of the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, let's talk about what they didn't teach you in school. You've heard of D-Day, Hitler, and the atom bomb? But did you know the Nazis tried to crash Britain's economy with fake money? Or that the US military once strapped firebombs to bats? Yeah, that actually happened. This war was full of secrets, strange inventions, and stories so wild you'd think they were fiction. So today we're diving into 10 curious facts about World War II that you probably never heard of, but won't forget. Before we jump in, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It might seem small, but it seriously helps this channel grow, and I really appreciate it. All right, let's get into the stories. Let's kick things off with something that sounds straight out of a heist movie. Back in the 1940s, the Nazis came up with a plan so bizarre and so bold that if it had worked, it might have crushed the British economy without firing a single shot. They called it Operation Bernhard, and the idea was simple. In theory, flood Britain with counterfeit money. Not just any money, but near-perfect copies of the British pound. Enough fake cash to cause inflation, bankrupt the system, and weaken the country from the inside out. And here's the chilling part. They didn't use elite agents or master criminals to pull it off. They used Jewish prisoners. Inside the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, just north of Berlin, the Nazis handpicked prisoners who were artists, printers, bankers, even forgers. Men with the skill or the potential to recreate the most secure currency in the world. These prisoners were pulled from death camps and brought to what the Nazis called a special unit. They were treated slightly better, warm clothes, decent food, but the goal was horrifying. Mass-produce fake British notes so flawless that even the Bank of England couldn't tell the difference. They pulled it off. The notes were so convincing that British intelligence panicked. Banks were told to stop accepting certain denominations. After the war, the Bank of England had to redesign its currency to avoid future threats. In total, Operation Bernhard produced what today would be worth over $3 billion in fake money. And while the plan to drop the bills over London by plane never came to pass, the Nazis did use the counterfeit cash to fund espionage, bribe, and buy supplies. In the final days of the war, they dumped crates of this fake money into lakes in Austria to cover their tracks. Some of it's still being pulled up by divers today. It's one of the most overlooked stories of World War II. A war fought not just with tanks and bombs, but with printing presses and paper. Picture this. You're a German scout in 1944. You spot American tanks in a French village. Radio chatter's buzzing. Troops are on the move. Looks like a full-blown invasion is coming. Except, it's all fake. The US military created an entire fake army unit during World War II, known as the Ghost Army. Their mission? Deceive the enemy using inflatable tanks, sound effects, fake radio transmissions, and even actors dressed as officers. These were artists, designers, and sound engineers, not typical soldiers recruited from places like Hollywood and ad agencies. They'd roll into a village, blow up a bunch of rubber tanks, set up speakers that played the rumble of an approaching army, and broadcast fake radio chatter to fool German intelligence. In one operation, 1,100 men managed to simulate the presence of over 30,000 troops. Their deception tactics helped divert German forces during key moments, including the lead-up to the D-Day invasion. And here's the wild part. The entire operation remained classified until 1996. These guys didn't fight with bullets, they fought with illusion, and they were very, very good at it. Okay, here's one that sounds like a cartoon. During World War II, the US developed a secret weapon that involved, wait for it, bats, real live bats. The plan was to strap tiny incendiary bombs to hibernating bats, load them into canisters, and drop them from planes over Japanese cities. Once released, the bats would wake up, fly into attics and rooftops, and boom, ignite fires all across town. The logic? Japanese buildings were mostly made of wood and paper. Fires could spread fast. The project actually made it to testing stages and showed promise. Until one test accidentally burned down part of a US airbase, the project was quietly shelved. It's one of those ideas that sounds crazy, but in wartime, people were willing to try almost anything. Now here's something most people have never heard. During World War II, Japan managed to launch an aerial attack on the United States mainland, using balloons. Starting in late 1944, the Japanese military released over 9,000 balloon bombs. massive hydrogen balloons equipped with explosives. They were designed to float across the Pacific Ocean, riding the newly discovered jet stream, and land somewhere in North America. It took about 3 days for each balloon to make the journey. Many were lost or crashed into the ocean. But around 300 actually reached the US and Canada. They landed in places like Oregon, California, Montana, even as far east as Michigan. And tragically, one of them killed civilians. In May 1945, a woman named Elsie Mitchell and 5 children were on a church picnic near Bly, Oregon. They found a strange balloon device in the forest, and as they approached it, the bomb detonated. All 6 were killed instantly. They remain the only known U.S. civilians to die from enemy action on the mainland during World War II because of national security. And to avoid panic, the U.S. government kept the incidents quiet. They even asked newspapers not to report on the balloons, which led the Japanese to think their plan had failed. Today, a small stone monument in the Oregon forest honors those 6 lives lost. It's a haunting reminder that even a war fought across oceans wasn't always so far away. It sounds like a joke from a late-night comedy show. The Great Emu War really happened. In 1932, Australia had a problem. Over 20,000 emus, massive, flightless birds, were stampeding through farmlands in Western Australia, destroying crops and fences. Farmers were desperate, so the government responded the only way they knew how, by sending soldiers and machine gun. Yes, seriously. Armed with 2 Lewis guns and thousands of rounds of ammo. Soldiers tried to outsmart the emus, but the birds proved surprisingly tactical. They ran in scattered groups, were fast, and incredibly difficult to hit. After a few failed ambushes and jammed weapons, the soldiers gave up. The birds won. Operation was called off, and the press dubbed it the Emu War, but the emus declared the victors. Now fast forward to World War II, some of those same soldiers, veterans of that bizarre campaign, served in the Pacific Theater. Among Allied troops, their EMU war stories became legendary. Not just because it was hilarious, because it was a reminder that even when you're well armed, victory isn't always guaranteed. Sometimes, even the birds win. World War II was full of desperate tactics, but few were as grim and heartbreaking as this one. In the early 1940s, the Soviet Union faced a major problem. German tanks wear a steam rolling across the Eastern Front. In response, Soviet commanders developed a brutal solution: anti-tank dogs. These dogs were trained to carry explosive charges strapped to their backs. They were taught to run underneath tanks, where a trigger would detonate the bomb. It was intended to be a suicide mission, and it was. But there were serious flaws in the training, you see. The dogs had been conditioned using Soviet tanks, familiar shapes and smells. So when deployed in actual combat, many ran toward the wrong targets. In the chaos of battle, dogs often fled back to Soviet lines, sometimes triggering deadly explosions among their own troops. Despite some reports of occasional success, the program was ultimately scrapped, caused confusion, unintended casualties, and raised serious ethical concerns, even during a total war. It's a haunting example of how war pushes people and nations to make choices that, in peacetime, would be unthinkable. Most soldiers came home in 1945, but for one Japanese man, the war didn't end for another 29 years. His name was Hiru Onoda, and he was an intelligence officer sent to the Philippine island of Lubang in 1944. His orders were crystal clear: do not surrender, fight to the end, survive, wait for further instructions. So when Japan surrendered in August 1945, he didn't believe it. Leaflets were dropped, planes broadcast messages. He thought it was all Allied propaganda. Even as the world moved on, rebuilding cities, forming new governments, Onoda stayed in the jungle, living off the land, hiding in huts, occasionally clashing with local police. Others surrendered. He didn't. By the 1970s, people knew he was still out there. Search parties were sent. Even his family tried to reach him. He dismissed it all as enemy tricks. Finally, in 1974, his former commander, long since retired, flew to the island, found him, and gave him new orders. Stand down, the war's over. Onoda came out of the jungle. In full uniform, and formally surrendered his sword. He was 52 years old, and still believed he had done his duty. His story became famous, part tragedy, part devotion, part cautionary tale. This one sounds straight out of a science fiction novel, but Winston Churchill was serious about it. During the early years of World War II, Allied forces had a huge problem. There weren't enough aircraft carriers to patrol the Atlantic and protect convoys from German U-boats. So British scientists dreamed up something unconventional. What if they built an aircraft carrier out of ice? The project, codenamed Habakkuk, would use a special material called pykrete, a mixture of ice and wood pulp. Surprisingly, pykrete was super tough. It resisted melting and could even stop bullets. It floated, it was strong, and it didn't require steel, which was in short supply. A prototype was built on a lake in Canada. It worked. They even tested how to insulate it with refrigeration units to keep it frozen in the Atlantic. The goal was to build a carrier over 600 meters long, big enough to launch bombers across the ocean. But like many wartime ideas, it fizzled. The time it was viable, other technologies, especially long-range planes, made it unnecessary. Still, it remains one of the most ambitious and strange engineering plans of the entire war. Sometimes the smallest things send the loudest messages, and in this case, it was a condom. Before launching the invasion of Italy in 1943, the Allies wanted to trick German intelligence about where and how they would attack. So, they launched Operation Mincemeat and other deception efforts. But one tactic was simple and brilliant. Allied planes dropped crates of British condoms, oversized ones labeled as medium. The message, Allied soldiers particularly. The British were giants. It was psychological warfare. German troops who found the supplies would question what kind of force they were really up against. It sounds funny now, but in war, every ounce of doubt you can plant in your enemy's mind is a win, even if it comes from latex. Here's the ultimate irony to end on. Adolf Hitler had a nephew. His name was William Patrick Hitler, born in England, and he actually visited Germany in the 1930s. He tried to use his connection to Adolf to land. Good job, but the relationship soured. He later moved to the United States, gave public speeches denouncing his uncle, and get this, enlisted in the US Navy during World War II. He served honorably, even got wounded in action. And to top it off, he wrote a scathing article titled "Why I Hate My Uncle," which ran in Look magazine. After the war, William changed his last name and quietly lived in Long Island, New York. He married, raised a family, and never spoke publicly about the connection again. It's one of those weird folds in history. While Adolf Hitler was orchestrating a global catastrophe, his own flesh and blood was fighting against him in the very Navy trying to bring him down. So how many of these did you already know? Is there one that completely caught you off guard? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear which fact surprised you the most. And hey, if you enjoyed this kind of history, the strange, the unexpected, the almost unbelievable, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories coming your way real soon. Thanks for watching, and as always, sleep well and good night.